Hey there, mamas! So today I'm going to be doing what's commonly called unpaper towels, which is really just like a paper towel replacement using cloth, or, as most of us would say, rags. If you want them to be pretty and you want them to match your kitchen decor, you can sew them from scratch, or you can sew them using recycled materials or upcycled materials. Really anything will work, it's just rags. So you could take old t-shirts and cut them into squares. That would be no fray. You could iron them if you want them to look pretty and roll them up and put them in a basket next to the table or on your counter or in a drawer. You could use just cloth napkins, sewn the way that I've already shown how to sew cloth napkins, and that would work. If you want them to be a little more durable and a little more scrubbing and a little more absorbent, you can use terry cloth. You could use old towels and then just use one layer because those are very thick. And then either serge or zigzag the edge or use some bias tape around the edge. You could use the Dollar Tree, dollar store type thin washcloths and then put another layer of something pretty over that, and you could turn them, or you could just turn the edge. Really, there's so many ways to do it, and I'm just going to demonstrate 3 ways. I'm going to use all new materials because I don't have anything right now that I want to upcycle. But this is something that you could use flannel sheets for, as long as they're not the poly flannel blend sheets. If they're cotton flannel, poly doesn't tend to be very absorbent. Really, like anything absorbent, test the absorbency before you reuse it. Even if it's a poly blend, if it's absorbent, it would work. You just don't want it to be something that just wipes things around and doesn't actually, soak up the mess. So I've got a few here. Let's look at what I've got set up. For this one, I have just some 1.5 inch bias tape that I've made, which ends up being, less than a 1/2 inch. And I've just used a strip, so there's some extra. I've made sure that it's long enough to go all the way around a piece of terry cloth. And I've just got white terry, but if you don't want it to show stains, you might want to use a colored terry, like a brown or a dark color. Then if it, gets stained, you don't need to worry about it. And for messes, paper towels wouldn't really make sense for them to be white, honestly. Even bleach isn't really going to be that easy to get rid of stuff. So for this, you can round the corner and make it easier to go around, or you can just do an angled corner so that it's less sharp of seams. And that's a really good way to just do like an edged piece of terry cloth. It would be kind of like a washcloth. You could also just take it and just serge the edges, and have it be not super pretty. Like, it doesn't really matter. You could make it pretty. You could use colored serger thread and, do it that way. A lot of the retail, reusable paper towels, right? The cloth towels, they are just a piece of absorbent fabric and then a serged edge, and the serging is the part that's pretty. So always an option. If you don't know a serger, you could use a zigzag stitch or one of the fake overcast stitches. And then for the next one I have here, I just have 2 layers of an absorbent flannel. There's, I've got my white layer, I've got my yellow layer. You could do this serged or turned. You could literally just put them faces together, sew around the outside, turn it, push out your corners, and then close it up, and then do a little bit of a quilting, and that will help hold it in place and keep it together. And then for this style, I'm sort of doing a combination of the cloth napkin style, and then also utilizing the terry cloth for the absorbency and the scrubbability. So I've just got a thin quilting cotton, and I have pre-ironed some creases in it. And for this one, you could do it just like for the cloth napkin and fold it backwards and, sew it and notch it, and then have the terry cloth then fit inside when it folds back over again. And you'll end up with like a mitered corner pretty edge. And then you just sew it down, and that will close up the edge and have it be scrubbable, and then you can go and quilt over, the surface so that nothing shifts. So we're going to be doing those 3 styles today. Let's start with this one. It's pretty basic. I'm going to just do it with serged edges, but before I serge it, I'm going to quilt it. And that way, when I serge it, if it gets shifted at all, that'll just cut off the edges. So you can draw some chalk lines if you want to worry about it being really nice and straight, but I'm just going to be doing a grid. And for quilting, you can quilt it in whatever pattern you want. You could do something cute, or you could just do a couple seams, or you could just do like a circle. It's just to stop things from shifting once they shrink. And I've only pre-washed these like once, but they're flannel and they will continue to shrink a little bit. But also, if you're using thicker fabrics, they can sometimes shift or twist, and it'll just keep it laying flat. So if you want it to lay nice and flat, that's what the quilting is for. And now, since I'm going to be serging this one and not turning it, I would have turned it before quilting it. But since I'm going to be serging it, I'm just going to take the edges and round it to make it a little bit easier. And you could do it with like a stencil to make sure that your edges are always the same amount, but I'm just going to be sort of eyeballing it and just doing like a rough corner. If you were doing a bunch of these, which, you know, on paper towels, I guess you would, then you could like lay them on top of each other so they're all exactly the same. You could also do something like this with a bunch of different like flannel scraps and just have a variety of patterns. And that might be fun. Just have a pile of, you know, scraps from other projects. And those can be your rags. When I was a kid, my mom used old cloth diapers as rags. We had a bin that we kept them in for things like washing the car or cleaning up spills. And it worked really well. But those were, you know, pre-fold diapers, so. Okay, so now it's all nice and pretty and rounded, and I'm just gonna serge around the outside. And this style doesn't have to be with flannel. It could be with any absorbent fabric. So you could even do this style with t-shirts as well. Just take, you know, 2 or 3 layers and quilt them a little bit and serge around the outside. Make some nice little colorful t-shirt scraps or, you know, old sheet sets. If you have regular sheets and then you also have flannel sheets, you could layer them up so that the flannel's for the absorbency, but then you have that second layer of the non-absorbent fabric. Because regular cotton sheets, even layered up, aren't going to be very absorbent. But, you know, they could still be a pretty print or a pretty color. It's still going to add to your quilting thickness. So there's your first one. Super basic. Just, you know, rounded edges, quilted, 2 layers of flannel or a couple layers of something else. You know, you could take it, you could fold it up, put it in a drawer, put it in a basket. You could roll them up. I saw a really cool one where somebody just had a bunch of them rolled up and then placed into a basket or a bucket near the table. So something like that's super easy. Awesome if you have some nice scraps. And then we're going to switch now to the ones that don't use the serger, although, you know, you could use the serger for really any of the styles. And this next one is going to be for if you have a fairly thick fabric, like if you're using old towels or cut up, you know, some other sort of thick fabric, sweatshirt fleece, something like that, and you just, you know, want to just close off the edge. So something like a towel where it's going to fray, right? That would be a great way. You'd want to use something like a binding over the edge. Either that, or you could just fold the edges over and zigzag them. But this is just one option. And I just made some bias tape. And it's not going to be gorgeous, but I'm going to take my edges and I'm going to cut them at an angle rather than rounding them, but you can do it either way. Just to sort of notch off that edge. Again, you really could just fold in the edges and zigzag it down. That would be enough to stop it from fraying. There's really so many ways to make, you know, attractively trimmed rags. This is just a couple ideas to try. So now I'm going to take it and I'm going to just wrap it around, you know, starting somewhere probably close to the middle. And I'm just going to clip it in place or pin it in place, whichever you want. Just wrap it over that raw edge. And, you know, honestly, if you have old sheets, this would be a good purpose for old sheets. Like, if you have old sheets that aren't absorbent, that are really thin, this would be a great thing to utilize them for. Cut them into strips and make them into bias tape. Old cotton sheets would make fabulous bias tape trim. Just cut an inch past where the overlap would be and fold the edge in a little bit and then just wrap it over to get your little, no fray finished edge. And so, you can make washcloths the same way as this. It's just a layer of terry and a little trimmed edge. That's all it is. But, you could make it to match the rest of your decor in your kitchen. And, it's just super simple. You could use a bunch of different absorbent fabrics and then just keep the trim the same and have that be what sort of ties everything together. So many options. But also, you don't need to make fancy rags. I can't reiterate that enough. Unpaper towels are just rags. You could buy a pack of bar cloths or what do they call them? Shop rags, and that would work fine as an unpaper towel. This is just if you want to make something a little prettier. For our last style, we've got our square of terry or whatever you want for your scrubby absorbent surface, and then I've got just some quilting cotton, but you could also do this with flannel like I did for the cloth napkins. I've got the edges folded in and creased with my iron just so that I can see where the lines are, and when they're folded in, they're the same size as that. And we're just going to take the corners and make our little mitered corners, which you don't need to do miter edges, you can do anything. But this is if you want them to be nice and pretty, look really finished. See where your crease is there. And then you can sew just straight up and down. So now with the corners turned, it's just like how the cloth napkin was with the mitered corners, and you can set in your absorbent fabric or your scrubbing fabric or just your second layer of fabric inside it. Just make sure it fits. You could always cut this fabric afterwards to make sure it's going to be exactly the right size, or you can trim it down if it's not. And you can just clip it down before you sew it or pin it. And now we're just going to sew it around the outside and then do a little bit of quilting. So there's the final style for these three. And it could be a dishcloth, it could be, a rag, it could be a washcloth. All of them can be used for multiple purposes. These are just really nice, finished looking, cloths, really. So there's your three different styles of unpaper towels, or wash rags, or cleanup rags, or washcloths. Use them for whatever you will. This is just a bunch of different ways to finish them off. Happy sewing.